Thank you, Priyadarshini. Thank you, Center for Financial Accountability and Financial Accountability Network, for asking me to speak on this occasion. I speak from the perspective of a lay observer of what's happening around us. We have two eminent economists, Professor C.P. Chandrasekhar and Professor Jayati Ghosh, and they can surely speak on the details, the finer details of the implications of the recent decision of the government to move 1.8 lakh crores, 1.7 lakh crores plus from the Reserve Bank of India, the country's central bank and the apex monetary authority, to the Government of India, the Ministry of Finance, the Consolidated Fund of India. Now it is going a little beyond, yes, at one level it's money that belongs to the people of this country, which is moving from one pocket to another pocket. But there are many other important implications of this decision. And what I'm sure I'll outline would be filled in by the economists who will speak after me, and Thomas Franco would speak from the perspective of bank officers and bank employees and the implications of the mergers that have been proposed. It was about 3 years ago that the then chief economic advisor, Dr. Arvind Subramanian, he, in the economic survey, had pointed out that the reserves of the Reserve Bank of India were higher than in other countries, and raised the question as to whether a portion of it should move from the RBI to to the government, from Ministry to North Block. And we know that there has been a fair amount of pressure on the Reserve Bank of India to move a large proportion of its money, not just in the form of dividends, but in terms of the capital itself. What we say, the contingency capital. The Reserve Bank gets its reserves through various means. A large proportion of it comes by issuing bonds, which are picked up by banks, and the interest it gains is added to that account. It also gains money because it is the custodian of foreign currency. So when, say, the price of the dollar appreciates vis-a-vis the Indian currency, that surplus now accrues to a revaluation reserve. Similarly, the gold that the Reserve Bank of India holds, when its prices go up, that money too accrues to this account of the Reserve Bank of India. Now, different countries have different levels, and the Vimal Jalan committee has given in some detail what different countries have. But the situation that different countries face is different. Of course it's different. I mean, it happened a long time ago. It was in 1991. Many people have forgotten, before the Narasimha Rao government came to power. Around the time, soon after Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated in May 1991, there was a time when the country's foreign exchange reserves had come down to barely 2 weeks of import cover. That means you had enough to just take into account 2 weeks of imports. This was preceded by two big shocks that had happened. I mean, one was, of course, oil shock. This was the first Gulf War, George Bush Sr. And we also saw before that a decision which was very, it aroused a lot of emotions in the country, because the short-lived Chandrasekhar government, with Yashwant Sinha as the finance minister, decided to mortgage a portion of the country's gold reserves to the Bank of England, because the country's foreign exchange reserves were in a precarious condition. Since then, of course, the country's foreign exchange reserves have improved substantially, but the external economic environment has not. In different ways. In the last 25 years, a lot of things have happened. In 10 years ago, 11 years ago, in 2008, you had a great recession. Wall Street melted down after the oil prices had shot through the roof, threatening at one point of time to touch $150 a barrel. Then it came crashing down. When the Narendra Modi government came to power, soon after that, oil prices were still high. It was about $115 a barrel. And thereafter, oil prices came down again. And this government has been a huge, has got a huge windfall gain in the form of low international oil prices. There are various estimates, but one estimate would put it during the term of the first Narendra Modi government, 2014 to 2019, the government received a windfall gain in the region of 10 lakh crore rupees by increasing the excise duty on various petroleum products. And only a very small proportion of it, some would say roughly 1/4 of the total gains that accrued to the government, were really passed on to the consumer in the form of lower prices of petroleum products, petrol and diesel. So this was a huge benefit that the government got in this 5-year period. 10 lakh crores. In a country where the current GDP, our gross domestic product, is about 200 lakh crores, roughly. I'll come back to these figures because there are a lot of similarity between some of these figures that we are talking about. Why are oil prices important? Oil prices are very important because India is importing about 80% of the country's, more than 80% of the country's total requirements of crude oil, and it's the single biggest item of exports. If you look at the single biggest item of both imports and exports. In terms of imports, it's about 1/3 of our total imports. If you look at it in terms of the value of imports is accounted for by crude oil. It also happens that, some would say curiously, some would say perversely, we also happen to be our biggest exports, are refined oil products from the Jamnagar refinery of Reliance Industries Limited. That also is another story. But to return to this whole issue of the Reserve Bank of India and its reserves, one obvious reason why the Reserve Bank of India needs to have healthy reserves is to prevent a run on the rupee, to prevent the Indian currency from suddenly coming down for whatever reason it could be. So, what if this trade war that's going on between the US and China escalates? What if there is a conflict in West Asia and oil prices again go up? There could be a variety of unforeseen reasons. To put it in very simple language, perhaps somewhat simplistic language, it's almost akin to that little bundle which has been stashed away by your mother or your grandmother in one corner of the almirah and not told to anybody. It's kept as a little, if somebody suddenly has fallen ill or has to be hospitalized, or there's an urgent need for money, this is the little funds that have been kept aside. So the government has been eyeing these reserves for a long time. 2 or 3 things have happened in the recent past which are important. First, I come to what has happened now in recent times. You had the Bimal Jalan committee that was set up, and its deputy chairman was Dr. Rakesh Mohan. He was former deputy governor of the Reserve Bank. For the first time, by the way, he let out in the public domain something which all of us knew, but it was never put in such obvious language. He says that one of the reasons why Dr. Urjit Patel put in his papers was because he was not willing to part with the reserves of the Reserve Bank of I mean, he has said it in public media interviews. It was earlier speculated and presumed, because as always when Dr. Patel put in his papers, he said it's for personal reasons. Same story with Virala Chicharya, the former deputy governor, who also says he's resigning for personal reasons. The point is that should be noted that these two people were handpicked in a sense by the government. Just as Dr. Arvind Subramaniam was picked by the government. He was their chosen nominee, if you like. And this is the same Dr. Arvind Subramaniam who, after he has demitted office, you can say, why didn't he say all these things earlier? Then he went and he's put out a paper where he says that the last 3 years of the UPA government and the first 3 years of the Modi government saw India's GDP growth numbers being artificially inflated by 2.5%. Naturally, the government was very upset when they heard all these things, and the head of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, Dr. Vivek Devroy, and others started picking holes in the methodology that was used by Dr. Arvind Subramaniam. But the fact is also true that even before Dr. Subramaniam came out with his paper, a large number of economists have questioned the manner in which the Central Statistics Office has been calculating GDP, the change in the base year. That in itself is not such a big thing, but the very, very slow pace at which they put out the back series of GDP data to have a comparison. All of it indicated that perhaps the government had a little more to hide, much more to hide than what it was disclosing. And we've seen there are economists, including people like Dr. Nagaraj of the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, Dr. Jayati Ghosh here, Dr. Chandrasekhar, they also have pointed out in their articles and their writings the way in which these numbers are being crunched and tweaked to clearly show somehow that the Modi government has performed better in terms of GDP than its predecessors. Now, all economists know, and this is this new goal that has been put out, $5 trillion GDP. This number actually means little. You can have a $5 trillion economy with the income and the wealth of the top 10% of the population or the top 1% of the population going up by leaps and bounds, with inequalities widening, the gap between the rich and the poor widening. You will still reach your target. That target means nothing. You are all along claiming you are the world's fastest growing economy, etc., etc., etc. Now you can't even make that claim. With the latest GDP numbers showing that in the April, May, June quarter, your GDP numbers have come down to about 5%, which is the lowest in the last 6 years. But nevertheless, this attempt is constantly being made that we are somehow different. And the fact is, what is being hidden is often more important than what is put out. I'll come to that a little later. But there is something that needs to be noted, and I want to link it up with what the previous speakers have been saying. You had the head of the National Statistical Commission and a fellow member putting in their papers. Why? Because the government did not put out the data which showed that unemployment in India had reached its highest in the last 45 years, since the early 70s, since 1972. Elections are over. The same data is put out. A little tweak here and a little tweak there, but you come back to the same conclusion that unemployment is at its highest in the last 45 years. So who were you fooling? From whom were you trying to conceal these important bits of information. When the report was leaked out to the Business Standard newspaper, people screamed and shouted. They said this data is incomplete, this is work in progress, you're comparing apples and oranges. Economists are smart, they know how to use jargon. But the truth had to come out, and it did. The current economic scenario is so bad that even the government, despite its best attempts at diverting attention, yes, we've had examples, Pulwama, Balakot, Article 370, soon you will have the Uniform Civil Code, the Ram Mandir. There's more in the offing, but what you can't conceal is also coming out. The auto sector, it's in a condition which it hasn't been for several decades now. Some would say at least its sales have gone down to levels that prevailed many decades ago. And interestingly, the worst hit may have been the passenger car segment, where you can say it's discretionary buying. But unfortunately, it's impacted the entire industry. It's affected the heavy vehicles, trucks, lorries, buses, considered to be capital investments, capital equipment, and also two-wheelers, scooters, motorcycles, which are impacted, which those belonging to the middle classes and the lower middle classes, they purchase. All the major auto companies have actually shut down production for different periods of time because there's no demand. Inventories are at their highest. Despite the fact that it's not just the auto sector alone, the textile sector, the tea industry, real estate, despite that, the fact that the Supreme Court has passed very, very severe strictures against major private real estate companies like JP, Unitech, Amrapali, in one case, even directing the public sector NBCC to actually take over those projects and complete them. Once again, the unsold inventories or stocks of housing in the country today is at it's one of its highest, perhaps the highest. This also means you're having an impact on other industries, notably cement and steel. So you don't like the recession word, you don't like the R word, it's dirty. You say in America it's negative growth for 2 successive quarters. But when you have sectors which have been growing at a fast pace traditionally, and suddenly that rate of growth slows down, जिस रफ्तार से बढ़ रहे थे अचानक उस गति कम हो जाता है, तो इसका मतलब तो वही होता है ना, it is akin to a recession. You are seeing job losses. You have seen job losses. So, even today, the government is in a state of denial about the impact of demonetization. It's going to be soon in November, it will be 3 years. But the impact of demonetization is still being felt because it affected the informal sector the most. It affected the weakest and the most vulnerable sections of Indian population, of the India's population. Senior citizens, women and children dependent on women, daily wage laborers, farmers, small shopkeepers, small traders, they were impacted the most. You said what were the reasons you want to curtail the use of black money? Has that happened? There's no evidence to indicate that. You want to show that the number of people filing income tax returns has gone up? Yes, it could have gone up in using other ways also. You're saying that that time, November 2016, you said वो जाली नोट का इस्तेमाल नहीं करेंगे, हमारे आतंकवादी लोगों ने जाली नोट इस्तेमाल नहीं करेंगे. I mean, the number of or the proportion of high quality fake currency notes is a very small fraction of the total amount of currency notes in circulation. You took your time telling the country what percentage of the notes had come back. You were hoping for another windfall. It didn't happen. All the money came back to you. Almost all the money. Maybe there's a little bit still lying in Nepal and Bhutan. You said cashless, less cash. Today, cash transactions have not come down less than 3 years after demonetization. The second point, look at GST. Even if you assume that the goods and services tax is a better tax than the kind of tax we've had, the speed at which you sought to implement it, the lack of preparedness, all have had huge impacts on different segments of the economy. I'll give you one example. Biscuits. Biscuits is not a luxury product. Ordinary people, poor people have, that packet of biscuits is 5 rupees, now it's gone up to 6 rupees. And today you have the two major biscuit producers, Britannia and Barley, saying we are having to shut down our production. As in the case of Maruti and others, first the contract workers go, and then they are saying now even we might have to curtail the number of employees on the job. So how does all this tie up with the Vimal Jalan Committee's decision endorsed by my classmate, the historian Dr. Shaktikant Das, decision to give 1.7 plus lakh crores? If you look at the interim budget that was presented by Piyush Goyal in February, you look at the budget that was presented by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman in July, and then look at what was virtually a revised budget presented recently, you will see, if you look at the government's own numbers, if you look at the government's numbers, what is given in the budget documents, what's given in the economic survey, and what is given by the Finance Ministry's own body called the CGA, the Controller General of Accounts. And you look at the government's another constitutional authority called the CAG, Controller and Auditor General of India. And you'll find there is one number which is coming very, very close to this 1.7 lakh crores. The difference between total expenditure, what you assumed, and what you actually got. The difference in what you said your total expenditure would be, and what you actually ended up spending. And the number is coming, is more or less exactly the same. This was this big hole in the government's accounts, which was sought to be filled out by appropriating this money, is kept as a contingency reserve of the Reserve Bank of India. So the short point is, I'm not talking about the bank merger. There are others who are more knowledgeable, better informed on the subject, and I've also sort of just skimmed the surface of certainly a bigger set of issues and deeper issues, which I'm sure Professors Chandrasekhar and Jayati Ghosh would elaborate on. But all I'm trying to say is the situation is really not looking good at all. I mean, I talked about the windfall money that the government got thanks to increasing oil prices, petroleum product prices. The non-performing assets of the banking sector had was somewhere there. 10 lakh crores. Now Nirmala Sitharaman says it's come down. You've written off a huge amount of this. Almost 40% of this amount has been written off. Again, if you look at the total non-performing assets of the banking sector, the biggest chunk, about a third, close to 1/4, belongs to one sector, that's power. The electricity sector, both generation and distribution. And this is not a small amount of money. It's 5% of your GDP. You look at what you claim is your fiscal deficit, and look at what the CAG itself says the fiscal deficit should be. We're not even getting into this whole debate about what should be the fiscal deficit, but what is the fiscal deficit? Your food subsidy is now being borne by the Food Corporation of India. Your oil subsidies are now being borne by the large oil companies. You are milked the Oil and Natural Gas Corporation. You put the BJP's own spokesperson, a medical doctor by profession, as its independent director. I mean, you made it buy up companies like the Gujarat State Petroleum Corporation, which was deep in red. You forced it to, you forced the Indian Oil Corporation to buy it. I mean, you're calling it disinvestment, you're calling it strategic sales, but you are also in here also moving, money from one pocket of the government to the other, from the Life Insurance Corporation to some of these companies. So this kind of subterfuge, this kind of playing with numbers, juggling of figures, spinning the numbers has continued, and I dare say will continue. It's up to groups like this one. आप लोग ये सारे जो जुमला मैं कहूँगा सरल भाषा में साधारण लोगों के सामने आप ले आइए, बताइए किस तरह से आपको धोखा दे रहे हैं, किस तरह से आपको दृष्टि और कहीं ले जा रहे हैं सरकार. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak with you. Thank you.